So thank you everyone for having me, and yes, I did have to come all the way from Australia, but I was in the US a week before that, so I'm not really sure what time I'm on, and 15 minutes and I should just about be able to stay awake. So thank you. A couple of quick notes before I kick off the presentation, and it is 15 minutes and it is 15 years of experience over that in certification programs and the lessons that we've learned, so it should hopefully deliver some value to the audience today. As John mentioned this morning, there's three key takeaways that resonated with me. Firstly, continual assurance, and that's really what Paul touched on there. Agile certification and assurance is really a critical thing. I like to think of it more like capability maturity in terms of certification. So we're all familiar with terms like common criteria, but the cost and the paperwork and the timeframes just aren't tenable, and that's something that we've learned. So certainly that's applicable in certification. Secondly, collaboration at scale is so very important. This is a global issue. IoT is a global problem and we need to address it as such. And lastly, buying secure. We've got to make sure what is a certificate worth. It's a piece of paper at the end of the day. We've got to make sure that people who are purchasing, procuring these technologies actually see value in the vendors attaining that certification. I will apologise in advance for my Australian accent. I do know that we're not exactly that easy to understand. I believe that this is going to be recorded, so hopefully later on you can slow it down and play it at half speed, and you'll have half an hour presentation that you'll actually be able to understand. So that's my dad joke out of the way. Yeah, thank you again, Paul. It was a really good lead in, and I'm glad hopefully we haven't duplicated any of the same messages and lessons learned. I'm not going to read through all these, I'll just go through them at a high level. I believe these are going to be available afterwards. The key issues that we've uniquely addressed and the lessons that we've learned over the past 15 years of developing certification and cybersecurity schemes and evaluation technologies. One, as I said, they need to be global. IoT is a global issue and you can't deal with it on a local level. Needs to be rigorous, accurate and reliable. They're actually the keys, including standards-based conformance. So standards are critical. A lot of people try and shun standards, and we've heard a lot about ETSI EN 33645, and luckily we're also in agreement with that at the moment. The independence and transparency, you've got to actually make sure things are independent and transparent. Integrity without bias or conflict. So there's a lot of stakeholders in the market, a lot of people trying to influence outcomes, and we've got to make sure that there is independence and neutrality and transparency in everything that we do. Longevity, it's not something that's going to last 3 or 4 years or a government term or a vendor's product life cycle. It's something that needs to endure over time for years. It needs to stand for decades, not just a short period of time. It needs to scale. As I said, it's a global issue. We need to make scalable programs for evaluation of the vendor's claims. Value and timeliness, this is really critical. Paul touched on that one. It can't take months, it can't take years, and it can't cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to get products through the process. It has to have a low impost on the vendors. There's a lot of paperwork that is involved in compliance with certification schemes and standards. Standards should be built in at the beginning. I really like the slide that Paul had, which explained where standards do actually fit in. They're not something that you bolt on at the end of a product development cycle. They're something which is embedded traditionally. Obviously with cybersecurity, it's an ever-changing landscape, and we can't always build it in at the beginning, and sometimes we do need to retroactively patch and fix systems. Also, the currency of the cybersecurity certification and label, it's live. You get certified today and tomorrow there'll be a known vulnerability that's released, which is unpatchable, and the vendor's product's insecure and it can't be fixed. So there's no point in certifying something for 12 months or 2 years and putting a stamp on it. Innovative. It's not as simple as it would seem on the surface. We've had to learn how to change and adapt and look at existing schemes around the world in terms of other standards, other certification, not just cybersecurity. So we all know that there's been a global consensus, or there was a consensus in 2019 when the Five Eyes nations signed a joint statement of intent. The fact that you could actually get 5 government ministers from different nations to actually sign a statement of intent was actually a really good thing for us to see. Even though it was one page, it was still really great. And at the end of the day, they said, this is a global problem and it's not something that government can fix, but we'll work with industry, and we expect the manufacturers and developers to move towards these things. And as James and Reece said, this was released 2019 and 2018, all the codes had come out. So you'd like to hope that the vendors and the manufacturers were actually paying attention and starting to move their products in 2018 and 2019 towards in ensuring that they comply with at least those basic three requirements. So the IoT Security Trust Mark Certification and Cybersecurity Labelling Scheme supports those objectives. And also in 2022, as we know, over 400 organisations actually signed the agreement to call for a global consensus on IoT security baseline. So there is definitely global want and global desire for these sort of things. So with the advent of the Internet of Things, it became evident that we did need a globally applicable cybersecurity conformance certification framework. This is a framework, it's not a standard. This is the building bones for issuing certificates and issuing labels if the vendors want to display them, or if government departments and agencies require those on products, or if the consumers in the market demand it. So we use standards such as those set by ETSI and ANISA, Singapore Standards Council, and the National Institute of Standards Technology. Where we came from, my company Enex was formerly part of the RMIT University. We're a technology testing company. We run a testing laboratory. We've been doing that for 33 years now. So this has grown out of work that we've done, ironically, in the UK. So from 2006 to 2011, we ran information assurance secure programs for Cabinet Office and the Home Office. So we're not just basing this on theory, we actually delivered this in practice. So a lot of people say, well, IoT didn't exist in 2006. It's connected devices. Internet of Things is a good word for it, but connected devices, and that's what we've been working with for all that period. So we can fit 16 years or 15 years into 15 minutes. 2017, we shifted the focus to IoT, and then we've packaged that all up and put it into a system. In the last 2 years, the lawyers have been working with all the jurisdictions to get the certification trademarks around the world, and we're working through that process still today. The key tenets are integrity, scalability, longevity and neutrality of the scheme. It engenders trust by maintaining clear integrity through the independence and transparency, which is achieved through federation. So there are a number of stakeholders, there are a number of distinct separate organisations which are involved in delivering this scheme, and they're all functionally and organisationally separate, and they all have their own duties, roles and responsibilities. That's how it's globally scalable, and it's not just one jurisdiction. It needs to be international. That framework needs to endure. It operates on a low cost, self-funded model, so we're not sitting there hand out asking for money or people to sponsor the program or getting grants. It's been designed to have no single point of failure, so there's just not one area. There's a lot of resilience within all those stakeholders around the world, and it doesn't have any reliance on a single source point of funding, sector or body. So for example, government policy, resourcing or budgets. And neutrality. The Security Trust Mark scheme uses globally accepted IoT security recommendations, guidelines and codes. As I said, we're not the standards defining organisations, we're not the standards body, we don't set, we don't ratify those standards, we adopt whatever the current good practice standards may be. Cybersecurity compliance. NIST has got a really good publication, SP 2001 and 2, generally typical for their federal government internally in the US, but it sets out really clear from a cybersecurity perspective, not just a standards perspective, how you certify. We're not talking about certifying energy rating, we're not talking about calorie nutrition labels, we're talking about cybersecurity, which is ever changing. So not only is there a requirement, how should something perform? Determination, how do we know that it performs? And attestation, who says that its performance has been demonstrated? That's what you do when you're looking at energy rating, that's what you do when you're looking at calories on products, and it's easy for anyone to reproduce and test that against that baseline or that criteria. The key with cybersecurity is surveillance. What about the assurances next week? What about those assurances next week? And how do we address those? And that's something that we've really spent time and money investing in getting correct for this scheme. I won't go into this in a great deal, but this just covers the transparency. So the scheme provides assurance to purchasers and consumers. And when we talk consumers, we're not just talking about mums and dads, we're talking about anyone who's buying an internet-connected device. So up to a certain level, this scheme can certify the majority of connected devices which are currently out there and hopefully should be out there in the future. And that's created through a vendor's claims document, which defines the requirement, and that's created alongside both the vendor and the accredited test facility that they choose. It's an open marketplace. That accredited test facility must maintain ISO 17025 accreditation. The determination that it meets the baseline IoT security requirements as set by the standards bodies and governments, and it's certified by a scheme decision authority. So the decision authority is actually separate from the accredited test facilities, and also the host country associations in each of the jurisdictions that the scheme's operating in. It's very imperative not to convey a false sense of security to those IoT consumers or the users through the trust mark, the certification or the labelling scheme, and therefore there's a constant series of surveillance across all the products which have gone through that certification, and really looking at common vulnerabilities and exposures as they become known, and comparing those and the National Vulnerability Database with the Software Bill of Materials. So it's very clear that it's constant surveillance, and that the vendors are notified immediately that an issue is found. And you'd like to hope, if they've been able to get through the criteria of the certification, then they generally have fairly proactive vulnerability disclosure and reporting mechanisms already, because that's one of the key requirements. So the way we actually do that is we have a traffic light system in the security trust mark. So essentially you get certified today and you get a green light, you get published on the evaluated products list. If a vulnerability is discovered tomorrow, then that is moved to amber, and you're basically suspended for the period until you issue a remediated patch or fix that product. If you can't fix that product, if it's broken fundamentally and you can't regain compliance or conformance, then it'll move to red, which means it's an expired state. Or that'll happen in 12 months, or it'll happen in 24 months. So basically the traffic light scheme moves between green and amber fairly regularly. It depends on how secure the products are from the outset, but it's a very active and workable solution for all people involved. So as I said, there was a number of stakeholders involved from a governance perspective. There's host country associations and scheme secretariats which represent the schemes in each jurisdiction. There's then a decision authority, which is a technical body which sits overarching and approves the accredited test facilities at whatever level those ATFs are actually seeking to enter the market and work with the vendors. Then of course you've got the IoT provider, manufacturers and developers, but in reality it's the IoT users and the buyers which need to be the ultimate beneficiaries of A, the technology that they're buying, and B, the security that they're looking for in their supply chain. So this is the process. I won't go into it in great deal. One of the key things which we always talk about is cost. Now, the way we limit the complexity of the products which are being submitted by the vendors, and there can be too complex a product, and then it is worth going through common criteria and spending the hundreds of thousands of pounds and taking the time, because that's not a product which is likely to change rapidly, is that it's capped at no more than $30,000 and 30 days. Now, in our experience, to create a vendor's claims document, it's under $2,000, and to actually put a product through it, it generally takes 7 to 10 days. So we're talking a maximum cap of $30,000 for quite a complex product, and no more than 30 days to receive a pass or fail. So vendors really like complaining about adding the cost of compliance and the time to get to market and things like that, and we've addressed that through this scheme and make sure that we can go through that full compliance within that period of time. The majority of vendors are still failing at the vendor claims document component because they can't even comply on paper, so there's no point in even putting their products into the lab, and that's why it is that two-step process. Vendor claims document, lodgement, they work with accredited test facilities, they're not just out on their own trying to blindly fill in paperwork, and then the decision authority will review that, and if they get to the next level, then they'll go through lab-based testing. This is the fine print. I had to do this presentation for a bunch of retired engineers in Australia, and they said it's too fine a print for us to read, and I said, don't worry, it's too fine a print for anyone to read. So as we've heard today, there's a bunch of standards, recommendations, guidelines and codes. Obviously ETSI EN 303-645 is currently the one that we're adopting as good practice, but in the future there might be others which are developed and come out. So it's the baseline requirements, which are set by the scheme senior executive, are mostly comprised from EN 303-645, and we don't cherry pick, so we don't just take 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 12, we do all 13, and then the same with other standards where there may not be an overlap. So we've done a whole mapping exercise, and we can ensure that we can grandfather or ensure compliance and conformance with the majority of these codes of practice, and also even industry self-attestation initiatives. So a number of organisations like to make their own claims about how secure they are, and the vendor claims document will enable them to ensure that they have that, so then they can, even though it's been independently verified, they can still make their own self-attestations. So alignment with IoT Security Trust Mark. Everyone asks us about the label. It's a QR code, and that's one of the best things that COVID's given us, is the fact that most consumers know how to use QR codes, and that QR code will link them directly to the evaluated products list, and either a green, an amber or a red in terms of the actual certification. Then it'll link them to also what we call the nutrition label, which gives them everything. So if a vendor really wants to publish it, if they're going in for a tender or something like that, they can actually show where their conformance is to the baseline requirements, whether it's mandatory, whether it's optional in terms of one of their claims that they're making, or whether it's partial, they may not include certain characters or functionality which needs assessment under the standard. So next step, we're a known pilot. We've been running for almost 12 months now, and we're inviting leading IoT vendors to actually submit and go through the process. It's all private, it's not public. We don't say this vendor failed, they couldn't complete their vendor's claims document. We basically work with them, and then at least they know where they sit and they know where they need to improve. So it's like an MOT certificate for your car. You go in, you get the list, you decide whether you want to invest or you want to invest in the next vehicle, things like that. And then if they pass, then obviously they go through the process, and then if they pass that, then they'll be issued with the certificates and the label if they want to voluntarily do it. Harmonise, as I said, we've been out there trying to tell people and raise awareness for it. We've been seeking parties that are interested in becoming host country associations around the world. We've been engaging with government departments and organisations, as well as the Australian government departments and agencies. And yeah, that's it. So in conclusion, the Internet of Things Trustmark is a third-party conformity assessment, certification and voluntary live cybersecurity labelling scheme, providing IoT users, which are the consumers, with a recognisable level of assurance that IoT providers, the vendors and the manufacturers' security claims about their product have been independently evaluated and conform with internationally established baseline security requirements. It's a neutral, independent, global scheme which supports the social benefit of IoT for good. Thank you.
Okay.
As I said, you can play it back later. And stuff.
Stay there.